I'm Carmel McGregor and I'm your chair for this afternoon. This is the session on key emerging trends in the public sector. And it's very relevant because as we think of serving in the 21st century, we do need to take stock of the issues which have emerged from a variety of lenses. So we'll look at this issue from the perspective of the customer or the citizen, also employees themselves, but also what we have gleaned from the system itself and the challenges which present. So we'll explore how well we are positioned as a public service at the moment, and through our very expert panel, how well positioned we are for the future. Could those who are coming in try and grab a seat quickly, but also just keep the noise levels down. It's a bit hard to hear. So we do have 4 eminent speakers, and I am warning you all that you are going to stick to time, and I will give you at the 9-minute, or grab the microphone off you and pass it on to someone else. I also lucked out and got the freeform panel who have already disrupted the seating arrangements. Some are going to be coming up here and speaking to slides, some are going to sit over there, but we're highly flexible, adaptive and agile. So here we go. So time's critical. We'll have mics there. We also have the capacity to get your tweets and questions as they come through, but break into the question and answer after the 4 speakers. So we're going to start with Steve Sedgwick. And Steve, as many will know, is the Australian Public Service Commissioner, a position he's held since the end of 2009. And given his responsibilities in providing a report each year to the Parliament on the state of the service, he's very well placed to share the insights on the preparedness of the public service to face the challenges, but also the elements which we must harness to improve the position of the APS. So he will have a perspective from the system, but also from what he learns through his State of the Service report each year. So please welcome Steve Sedgwick.
All right, look, I'm going to try and do this in a very summary kind of fashion. I'm going to skip right across the top of some really complex stuff, and I'm working on the basis that if you want to follow some stuff up, you'll either read the State of the Service report when it's tabled on the 2nd of December, or you'll ask, okay? First thing I think it's important for us is to recognise that the key challenge that our country faces is lifting national productivity. That's the only way, frankly, we're going to improve living standards over the next 10, 15, 20 years, because the terms of trade aren't going to save us anymore. We have a problem in the public sector. Our problem is we don't have any measures of productivity. The reason for that, we're not in the market economy. We don't have a difference between the value of our output, because no one buys it, and the value of our inputs. And that difference is a measure of productivity. All of our measures are partial. We do have some measures, and they tend to relate to the efficiency of our organisation, the effectiveness of our programs, and increasingly the effectiveness of our organisations. And I want to quickly move through some of those. Efficiency, obviously enough. But at the moment there's gathering momentum to collaborate to reduce costs. When the Commission talk about inventing things once, using it many times, if you're looking for examples, the way we do the APS census now, what's known as the Core Skills Project, where we're spending $60,000 to invent a performance management module that can roll out in every agency across the public service. It'll be in a place near you very, very, very soon, saving us a fortune. The way we do work level standards, the way we do workforce planning, a whole bunch of other stuff, right? But that focus towards collaborating in order to drive costs down is going to be an enduring feature of our world in the time to come. Second, the effectiveness of programs. Again, that's reasonably straightforward, at least at the level of principle. What we need is evidence driving the design of programs. That needs good analysis, being creative in the way that we do things, using a full range of techniques. And that includes these days not just the subject matter disciplines that we picked up at university, but increasingly multidisciplinary skills like nudge thinking, behavioural economics, all of those kinds of things, to try and frame and reframe questions in different ways. Critically, though, it also involves professional approaches to evaluation and the professional dispassionateness that allows us to act on whatever those evaluation findings come up with, no matter how inconvenient it might be to us. Program effectiveness we've been doing for a long time. Organisational effectiveness is something new. It comes out of the blueprint. And there's this notion here that our organisations are a system. They're a system whereby resources are applied and redeployed, and one of our most important tasks is to make sure that we apply them to the things that matter most and that we get the maximum result out of the resources that we use. That system is based on the skills and the motivations and the attributes of individuals, but it also gets down to our processes, our structures, our governance arrangements, our accountability frameworks, and our workplace cultures. And when you look to see why it was that some things went badly wrong, when you go back and have a look, you find what typically happens is there are multiple points of failure within that system. There might have been skill issues, but there might also have been a case that the accountability framework, the governance arrangements didn't require people to surface issues that needed to be addressed at other levels within the organisation, and the culture was such that you didn't admit when you were in trouble. Increasingly, we need to look at the system that our organisations represent. There's some very fundamental parts of this that are really around our human capital. The stuff that's in these two columns on the far right are different components of our human capital agenda. First is leadership. Visible leaders improve staff engagement, and we know that that improves productivity or effectiveness in our world. It's leaders who set the appetite for risk. It's leaders who empower innovation. It's leaders who set the ethical framework and values through what they do rather than what they say. We have a lens on leadership at the moment that we've not had in quite some time. The second is what we call here performance management. This is not just about feedback. This is not just about managing underperformance. Fundamentally, this is about alignment. This is about being clear about what our objectives are and ensuring there's a clear line of sight between government priorities, the business objectives of the organisations, the business plans of work groups, the business plans, the performance agreements of individuals, and then continuous feedback to make sure that effort is always applied, consistent with those resources. So effort is not wasted and we maximise the effectiveness of the resources that we have. It's fundamentally about goal clarity and alignment. Third is about capability. We need to be a forward-looking institution. We absolutely walk through brick walls. We could administer just about anything, except in circumstances where we have catastrophic failure. We can just about administer anything. The problem is that there are many people who believe we got a bit reactive, a bit backward-looking. And what we need to be, at the same time that we are responding to the agenda of the government of the day, is to be forward-looking and creative, see what are the issues that are emerging down the track, think through their implications for our organisation, build capability in advance of predictable need, most importantly, build resilience, because you can be absolutely confident the one thing we won't do is get the future right. When we look at those capabilities that we currently have, we've done capability reviews, but also we asked agencies to do their own self-assessments as part of the agency survey that informs the State of the Service report. Interestingly, only 1/4 of agencies believe that they are at the current required level of capability in respect of change management, performance management, risk management, or workforce planning. 1/4 of agencies believe that they have those capabilities at the correct level at the moment. Roughly 30% believe that they are at the correct level in respect of stakeholder engagement and internal resource allocation. And those findings have been confirmed externally by the capability reviews. Think about it for a little minute. We're about to go through a period of major change. Just think about that capability set where we think we've got some work to do. Another element of our human capital reform agenda is around having the better allocation of work to level. This is around organisational design. It's around ensuring that everyone in the organisation is doing work appropriate to their level. The pay structures reflect that, but their performance management, their understanding of the work that they're meant to do is consistent with the work level that they're actually being assigned to. We've reinvented the work level standards. The performance management framework helps us to do this, but fundamentally we have to go back and rethink our organisations. And again, the capability reviews say that for many of us, we've got work to do in that space. Okay, we've got a lot of work to do. There's some others, but I won't go into them. My point to you, my takeaway for the minute, is we've actually got new tools available that have been worked up. We've been part of that process, but frankly, so is the whole of the public service. We've got a whole bunch of new tools around leadership development, around talent management, around performance management. There's a diagnostic tool that can be applied within your organisation, so you get a sense of the gap between rhetoric and reality within your organisation. There are learning and development options that are available to skill people within organisations to structure work properly so that you can properly manage work over time and in the giving and receiving of feedback. We've got new tools around workforce planning, including a job family model. We've got the new work level standards, which are designed to help us design these decisions and and underpin performance about discussions. We've got new tools coming in line, which will be available within a couple of months around change management. So the tools are there. The thing that's important to us is to recognise that while we're doing our day job, while we're coping with whatever number of thousand it is that the public service is going to be adjusted by following the Commission of Audit, whatever the reprioritisation of activity across the public service that's going to happen over the next few years as we seek to bring the budget deficit down, hopefully get a surplus around 1% of GDP or something, while nonetheless improving the allocation towards infrastructure. I have 1 minute, Madam Lash, and various other things. No matter, while we go through that process of reprioritisation, we will do it better if we actually invest in those tools that improve the capacity of our human capital to do their job well, to specify what our objectives are, to clearly flow them through into performance expectations across the organisation, to have leaders who know how to engage their people, to have people who are doing the work at kind of the right level, and to know how to manage risk and manage change at a time of great change. Thank you very much.
Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Sonja Stewart. Sonja is the Deputy Commissioner from the New South Wales Public Service Commission, and Sonja's responsibility is to improve and report on sector performance, and she has considerable experience at both the federal and state level, and is now working on the issues of how the individual employee plus the system will bring about the changes and set her jurisdiction fit for the future. So, speaking to her slide now as well. Thanks, Sonja.
Thank you. I'm racing to the podium. I'm a Yuin woman, and it's really important to acknowledge that we're on the land of the Ngunnawal, and the Ngunnawal have got a very important place in the very recent history of my mob's very long history, and I just wanted to acknowledge that happens a lot of advocacy up the hill, and I don't mean Parliament House, I mean the Tent Embassy, which has been going on for a number of years. So I wanted to acknowledge not only the Ngunnawal mob, but the mob from across Australia who find the Tent Embassy their home. So what I'm going to say to you is exactly what he's having. But I think that there's a reason for that, and that's because when you think about the things that are facing our sectors and you base it on evidence, you listen to the voices of employees, things that have gone well and things that haven't gone well, you come to the same sort of conclusions. But my slide is much more simpler because I'm the deputy and he's a commissioner, of course. And so I guess I'm just going to tell you about what we're doing in our jurisdiction. We've come on the back of a commission of audit and a number of recommendations for my boss, Graham Head, to implement. And we have some just under 400,000 employees in our sector, a big sector. It makes up 10% of the New South Wales workforce, so it's very, very important in my role in thinking about performance. So in terms of focusing on us as individuals as part of a workforce, which is part of a system and a culture and a whole of state, we're really focusing on individual employees in our sector and our work experiences, and particularly that link to employee engagement. And this focus on us as individual employees and how we experience the sector is from the end-to-end process. So how is the job advertised? How are we recruited in? A lot of our sector uses the most unpredictable way to actually find the best talent, which is often an interview, which I call an Australia Public Service Got Talent sort of thing, where you go for the extrovert, and if you're lucky, a couple of referees and a written application. So what are we going to be asking you to do to show your capabilities against that position? How do we onboard and induct you and talk to you about things like our culture, our values and our expectations, particularly around performance? And particularly how we managed and developed, and this absolute link between our individual goals and objectives and the organisational goals and objectives, and ultimately the government of the day and what they want to drive. How are we mobile? Our sector we're not highly mobile, and what does that mean? We're going through some legislative changes now. Instead of being recruited to very narrowly defined position descriptions, that we would be recruited at a grade, or if you're a senior executive, to a band. That's a very big difference to what's previously happened in the sector. And what are our experiences? How do we experience the values? The change of government, the new government legislated values in our sector, very, very important difference. But also employee engagement with that absolute link to productivity that Steve spoke to. And we, for the first time, ran an employee survey last year. We asked 5 questions on a say, stay, strive model. Very easy to do, and I know that the Commonwealth and other jurisdictions do it. Our engagement indice was 61%. We used the same model as the United Kingdom Civil Service, which is a big civil service. They're around 56. So yes, we're doing okay, but we actually need to do better. And what we're focusing on are who are the people who are engaged. No surprises to you, they're the people who've had regular feedback, both informally and formally, about their performance, and who aren't they, and what do they think. And the people who aren't engaged in our sector are male. They work on the front line and they've been in their agency for more than 2 years. And so once you know who these cohort are and what are their experiences, you can go in and look through the data, how do they answer the questions of that People Matter survey? And some of the findings are amazing, and I just want to read the 3 questions where the biggest difference were. So if you were highly engaged and you strongly agreed, and if you were poorly engaged or low engagement and you strongly agreed. The 3 questions are: senior managers providing clear direction for the future of the organisation, having confidence in the way an organisation resolves grievances, and senior managers listening to employees. 50 percentage point difference if you were a highly engaged employee answering our survey and if you were lowly engaged. When we come to workforce, so we all belong to very big workforces, we're looking at, we're interested in size, and so what, everyone's interested in the size. For the first year, we're going to be reporting more than 10 years a reduction in our size of our workforce. But not only the size of us, but where do we work, where do we live, how many layers are there in our structure before you actually get to a front line and can get to a decision maker in the chain. And very importantly, the productivity measure of our sector and our workforce. We simply cannot go on the inputs-outputs model, where the inputs is our FTE and our outputs is our budget line item. And I'm working to our advisory board, which is chaired by Professor Peter Shergold, on how do we get a better measure that looks at value, the quality that we actually deliver. Because you're right, we don't have the market competition, but we've got to get better at measuring that, and managers need to get better at understanding what are the drivers of that productivity measure. In terms of systems, our Commission of Audit recommendations had a number of things to say about our systems, human capital management systems in the intensive care unit probably in our jurisdiction, and how do we improve those. And I'm talking about things like not only hardcore things like e-recruitment or a human capital management IT solve, I'm talking about more soft skilling as well, like capability frameworks and performance development frameworks. I'm talking about not only internally what do we think and what do agencies, what's happening in there with agency surveys, but that line down the bottom, the customer. And for the first time, having a tool which will measure customer satisfaction and how they actually perceive us as public servants versus the conflict. It's actually in conflict with the satisfaction with the service they receive. And that actually means something, and we've got to understand that. And the last one is culture, and it's a very important one. I ran the first survey across our big workforce. We didn't get such a great response rate first time, but I'm hoping to match other jurisdictions next year. And the 3 themes that came out of that were performance development. About half of the people never have any type of conversation about how they're going. Bullying, unacceptable levels in our jurisdiction. And the third one was communication. And so we are starting it sounds funny to start a discussion about communication and a dialogue, but we've got to value it, better, we've got to embed it, and we've got to upskill and develop for it. And in terms of valuing it, I think, not just in our jurisdiction, but I'm interested in comments across the board, that over time we've devalued the currency of being a good manager of people. We often say, great job, you got that project done, or there's not too many bodies on the floor, or the policy thing went up without too much red paint on it, or you delivered on budget. But very, very seldom do we hear, gee, your team looks engaged, and what's going on with your team there, and you're managing really well. And we've got to start valuing the art of a good manager and the art of a good communicator. We also need to embed culture, high-performance culture in systems. We do need systems, it's not just about people. And through that, we're really relying on our performance development system, which I oversaw. And at that is not a box which you need to tick. It's very regular, informal and formal feedback. And if all you do is tick the box, then you're not getting a tick in my book. So you have to do something very different there. And the third one is about upskilling and developing, and absolutely agree. Senior managers, particularly when I rattled off those 3 questions, the other one there was senior managers modelling the values of the organisation. And people, for those of you who manage people, people see what we do, even perceive what we do when we're not doing it, and we need to really appreciate that and just understand that's part of being a senior manager or manager. But for those who need development in this, in having difficult conversations with people, some staff need to get better at receiving feedback, I acknowledge that as well. But also as senior executives in our sector, some 400 of us have had our capabilities assessed, and some individual tailoring around our executive development needs in that regard. So I think, Madam Chair, you're not doing I think I've met a key deadline here. I feel very, very proud. And so I guess I just wanted to say that absolute resonance, but there's a reason for that, and I'll be really interested in your observations later. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Dr. Jack Dan, who's sprinting over here now, the National General Manager of Government in Telstra. Jack has a deep knowledge of the government sector and has responsibility for strategy, relationship and customer experience. And he's been, I think when we met, Jack shared some research that he was undertaking, which shows what the community and customers want and need from government. And so this will give us another lens onto the emerging trends in the public sector. Thanks, Jack.
Hello, everyone. I'm probably going to squeeze every second out of this presentation because I have, as you can see, a lot of stuff to cover. But probably the way we're going to do it is I'll try to cover the important points, and when we come back to questions, we'll probably put up these slides, if that's possible. And then I'm happy to take questions on any of these points. We started, so as part of my role in Telstra, I lead a program called Connected Government Program, which essentially does research and thought leadership into the public sector. And as part of that, about 3 years ago, when we were looking at the blueprint for reform, we noticed that there isn't a customer view or a citizen view on aggregate across the government that gives some sort of an indication as to the perceptions of the public regarding service delivery from government. So we said, we'll do it. We undertook the first piece of research with a bit of trepidation because we didn't really know what was going to come up as a result of that. But since then, we got a bit more confident, and this is now the 3rd year that we're doing it. Now, because I only have very little amount of time available, what I'll do, I'll try to simplify it in 2 ways. First, I'll concentrate on federal government service delivery. That's the simple bit. And secondly, I'll try to stay fairly factual in terms of the feedback I'm going to present to you. So you'll hear a lot of numbers in terms of what people react and what is it that they say. And then hopefully in the questions following, we'll do a little bit more interpretation of the results and a little bit more insights. That being said, let me start with the interaction with the government. And I said that I chose the federal government because the interaction between the citizen and the government, it's less complex than in the case of the state. So if we're looking across the spectrum, at one end, we have about 24% of the population that interacts with government once a month or more often. At the other end of the spectrum, we have about 26% of the population that interacts with the government once or twice a year or less often. And then in between, we have the other sort of 50% of the population. So when you look across the board, you see that about 75% or 3/4 of the population will form some perceptions of government and government quality and service delivery on the basis of very few interactions, which means each of those interactions is actually quite defining in terms of creating perceptions and creating impressions on the citizen front. On the timeliness front, by and large, the government is meeting community expectations with regards to how long it takes to deliver a service or a transaction. That doesn't mean that it's quick. It just means that there is an alignment between, the perceptions of the citizens when they come to transact with or to engage with the government and what is it that they get. On the other half, so the other 50%, 10% say that over the last 12 months, the last transaction they had with the government took less than they expected, and they're quite impressed with that. However, about 29%, so that's close to 1 in 3, say that took longer, and then they delve into why that may be the case. So that is on the timeliness front. Now, if we're talking about the overall experience quality, the news is pretty good, and it's been good for the last 3 years. So in federal government, we have 52% of the population saying that their last experience with the government was good, and another 31% saying that the last experience with the government was fair. So on the positive side of the balance, we have about 83% of the population. We only have a bunch of about 11% of people who are disgruntled as a result of the last, or one of the last few engagements with the customer. But what we've noticed in regard to that percentage, that 11% of Australians, is that they are actually disproportionately cynical about the government performance, and then it reflects into their belief in the government's ability to bring value to the community, and also their belief into the government's ability to reform. So just a few defining experiences actually carry a lot of weight in terms of their perception going forward. And that probably doesn't make sense when you think about logically, but this is, remember, this is just the perceptions that the public bring to the table. Let's move on to assessing government services. And one of the interesting questions that gets asked a lot is trust, citizens' trust in government. By and large, we have a very solid foundation trust in the government institutions. Starting from that, we asked the Australians, what is it that would increase their level of trust in government? So what is it that can we do, or can the government do to improve it? And what's very interesting in that regard is that the top 3 most effective ways to improve trust are all related to communications. So the first one is listening more to the public and consulting with them. The second one is explaining complex issues more clearly in the media by the government. So we're not talking about media turning or spinning things around. We're talking about actually a genuine desire to hear a clear explanation as to why a particular policy decision is being taken and where it is going. And the third one is allowing stakeholders, so the public that is affected by a particular service design or policy issue, to have a greater level of input into it. Now, in the questions, I'm happy to talk about the fact that this is what Australians say, this is their stated preference in terms of being more involved. But they are actually not necessarily likely to get more involved when they have an opportunity to do so. But we'll park that for a second. All right. And also, probably I'll touch briefly on cost and value, and because there are a couple of quite interesting dichotomies there. So first, delivering value for money is of paramount importance to 81% of Australians. So they all say, this is what we want from the government. We want the government to deliver value for money. Do we get it? Well, only about 36% of them say they get it in the services they're currently accessing. But the things get even more interesting. So if we're talking about inefficiencies, we have about 61% saying that the government pays too little attention to inefficiencies. But then we have 70% who say that the government is too focused on cost at the expense of outcomes, and they should actually put more money into the system. So you figure that out. All right, now let's get a little bit more onto the technology front. I'm sure you expected that from me, being from Telstra and all. On reforming government service delivery, we asked about privacy and confidentiality. And in terms of Australians comfortable with knowing that their personal details are safe in government's hands. 54% of them strongly agree with that. This figure is actually up about 12% on 2012 and again up on 2011. So the trend is actually positive in that regard. Not only that, but the same amount of people who say they are very comfortable with the government handling their data and personal details in a safe way, they also say that they are very comfortable in sharing more data with the government, provided that one, it is easy to do so, and two, it contributes to effective service delivery. So that's a pretty good mandate from kind of over 0.5% of the population. The rest of them have various levels of concern, usually regarding the sharing of information between different government agencies and what exactly is going to be done with that type of data. So there is a need for more information and more explanations on that front. Now, in terms of, I'll skip to consulting the community. And I'll skip to that because I said before that people want to be consulted and want to be engaged and want to be communicated with. Now, in terms of the expectations, 71% say that they expect that the government will be able to balance, on one hand, getting on with the job, on the other hand, consulting them on things that matter. And it's only a minority of about 17 to 80%, quite consistent over the last 3 years, who have a firm belief, that the public should be consulted on everything. Now, if we're going back to those 71%, we then asked, okay, well, if you want to be engaged and consulted on things that matter to you, what are your top concerns? And there are no prizes for guesses what the top concerns are. You know, it's as the usual cost of living, followed by health, and followed by employment. What we did see, though, is that there are quite big shifts in concerns by age group. So the younger Australians are obviously mostly concerned about jobs. The ones between 30 and 50, once they got a job, guess what? They're concerned about health. Once they're over 50 and they survive the heart attack or whatever brought on by the job, they start worrying about two interesting things. One is immigration, which is partly explained by the fact that they may have kids who are now looking for jobs. And two is the behavior of politicians. And this is probably the only segment of the population that is really markedly interested in that. All right, I'll wrap it up by saying, by leaving you with 3 messages. First of all, we didn't have a chance to delve much into this, but there are very big demographic shifts at both ends of the spectrum. And we also see big disconnects between young Australians and the older people in terms of what they expect as channels of engagement and channels of consultation with the government. And I'm happy to go through that later. Secondly, on the technology front, the technology is proposed by Australians as the means to achieve 2 great things in their view. The first one is meet expectations for always-on services, availability of services. And the second one, and the most important, is providing the key channel for hearing from and interacting with the citizen. And this is by far the thing that Australians believe would greatly increase, or with most increased trust in government. And finally, the last one, demonstrating value for money in spending is vitally important. And unfortunately, the perceptions are that currently the government is not being able to do that. However, this is not because there is a fundamental lack of trust in the government, but because there is an expectation that effective communication will be able to address this. Thank you.
Okay, our final speaker is Dr. Stephen Condrey, and Stephen is our international guest today. He's the National President of the American Society for Public Administration, which is the IPAA equivalent in the US. He has significant experience in HR and is well published in the issues of public administration. So we've all been reading, Stephen, about sequestration and hearing all the challenges you're facing, and hope you can share some of that with us. I'll just pull up your slide. Gets to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carmel. Pleasure to be here. I appreciate you asking me to come. And I'll give you, in 10 minutes, no more than 10 minutes, I promise, because I know you will enforce it. I know you'll enforce it. Just an overview of HR in the United States. I'll talk about the federal government. I'll also talk a little bit about the states. I think the takeaway from this may be some of the things that are happening in the United States, you do not want to happen in Australia. So this is not a talk in how to do things, it's maybe a lesson in maybe what not to do. 4 areas I want to talk about. The first is the Great Recession, and I think it hit the U.S. a lot harder than it hit Australia. From the period from 2009 until the present, when Obama came into office, there was really great hope that public service, particularly HR, was going to reform. Obama talked about recruiting the best and the brightest, bringing them to government. About the time he took office, the bottom fell out of the economy. He appointed John Berry as the OPM director. He's now your ambassador, our loss and your gain. He's a wonderful person. He's the most visible director of the Office of Personnel Management in a generation, and was really poised to make some significant changes to compensation, to performance appraisal, to recruitment and selection, things of that nature. A lot of those ideas are still out there. You talk about a policy window and a policy stream. That window for change has closed just about all the way, and I think a lot of that was due to the recession. At the federal level, employees have taken a real brunt. There's been a 3-year pay freeze. On the positive front, there's going to be an increase in January. Can you guess what the increase is going to be? 1%. There's been sequestration, which is the automatic cutting of funds without any real kind of rational choice going into the process. I'm sure you're aware of the government shutdown that happened last month. There's a possibility of us going through that again in February. Hopefully that will not happen. What this has done, you think, of course, it's lessened, how employees feel about working for the government, those that work there now, then also those that best and the brightest that we wanted to recruit. I think it's dampened the desire for them to come to the federal service. Another thing that it's done, because federal employees have taken kind of a beating in this, is that trust in the federal workforce has declined. I think this is significant and it's serious. This is comparing 2009 to 2013. 2009, 13% of Democrats expressed low confidence in the federal workforce, 24% in 2013. Republicans, the more conservative kind of, I don't want to say anti-government, but small government, more independent, 28% with low confidence, almost half now. I don't think this bodes well as we try to build the federal workforce and to encourage young people, such as these young people that I had lunch with today, to come and work for the government. Another thing that's under attack is public sector compensation. Right-wing think tanks, the Heritage Foundation, will tell you that public employees are overpaid. I'm here to tell you that they're not. I'm chair of the Federal Salary Council that sets locality rates for 1.8 million general schedule employees in the United States. I want to show you just a bit of data here. Look at the first column. That is what the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates to be comparable pay in the private sector. The middle column is what the general schedule workers make working for the federal government, and you can see the differences. At the lower end, we quote-unquote overpay, and at the upper end, we're at about 30% behind the private sector. Grade 9 is our entry level for, say, someone that has a master's in public administration. That gap is 10%. It grows, as you see. At a grade 14, this would be a seasoned IT person, a deficit of 31%. So again, really hard, to compete with the private sector when you have such disparities, and then to hear the political rhetoric that federal employees are overpaid is just it's a bit hard to take. So diminution of employee rights. I spent about 30 years at the University of Georgia with their Institute of Government, and I also taught in the School of Public and International Affairs. In 1996, Governor Miller, who had been an HR director in state government, came to power. And he asked the HR, the head of the Civil Service Agency, to reform the Civil Service Agency. The head was non-responsive, so instead of dismissing the head, he essentially abolished the merit system for workers in the state of Georgia. So effective July 1, 1996, anyone that's hired for the state of Georgia does not have any employment rights. That means that they can be dismissed for no reason. And I think this has had a real chilling effect. This trend has spread not at the federal level, not really at the local level, but over half of the state governments in the United States, at least for some positions, have taken away employment rights. Here's a study that I did with Paul Battaglio several years ago, and we're looking at human resources directors in state government. There are positive ways that you can use employment at will if you need to cut back, you want to keep the most effective people, but there are also negative ways that you can use it. 32 or about 30% agree employment at will, sometimes used to fire competent employees so other people with friends or connections to government can be hired. 10% say, I know of a case where a competent employee was fired at will so that another person with friends or connections to government could be hired. 32% say employees have been terminated at will because of personality conflicts with management. So, I mean, this is new public management, kind of the dark side of it. And I think what it does is that you don't see really outright spoils, but it undermines the trusting relationships needed in an organization for it to function effectively. So I'll end with increasing pressure on the public sector workforce. Talk about retrenchment and retirement. We have about 60% of the federal workforce can retire between now and 2016. We need to be more effective in how we recruit people, constantly pay freezes and things of this nature. Of course, do not encourage people to stay with an organization. I quote unquote retired about 3 years ago. I took my pension literally from the state of Georgia, and so I retired at 60% of my salary, and over the last 3 years, every 6 months, I received a cost of living increase. If I had stayed with the state of Georgia, with the University of Georgia, I would have had no increase. So there's not much incentive to keep people with government, particularly at the state and local level. You don't see so much bashing of those employees, but there were a lot of jobs that were shed during the recession, and I don't think that they're coming back. I want to show you, this is a chart that shows the ratio of government employment to population. We are at the lowest level in 30 years. So if people think that they're working harder and doing more with less, they're absolutely correct. So I think that just to graphically show you a few of these things. I'm getting the nod, and but it's really about where I want to conclude. Or was it agreement? I'm not sure. But I think what all of this means is really important for HR professionals to step up to the plate. A lot of our problems they're not so much technical, they're political. But I think as HR professionals and as people that care about public service, we need to be advocates for public servants, and we need to kind of show the facts when people give us just rhetoric and not actual fact-based arguments. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Stephen, and thanks all of the panel. We've had several questions come through via the little machines and text, so I'll go to a couple of those, but I do know there are some people who would prefer to speak into the mic or raise their hand and ask a question, so I'll go to that as well, so think those questions up. The first one, and look, it sort of came out of Steve Sedgwick's presentation, but I'm sure all members of the panel might have a view, but when you were talking, Steve, about the tools and your model there, it was how can we measure the impact? All the measures you sort of expressed seem very output oriented, and sort of related to that, how will you deploy those tools so widely in a jurisdiction of 150, 140,000 people? So.
Hello? Oh,
Yeah.
God, it's alive. Okay, let's start at the back. How do we extend those across the service? All of those tools have been developed in close collaboration with professionals across the whole of the public service. Let me give you an example. Feedback, the giving and receiving of feedback at work. There was bunch sat down, tried to figure out what kinds of learning design criteria you should put behind some work of that kind. Then went and had a look across the public service and put together work that was done in the Department of Defence and work that was done in DIAC, put the two together, and there's your module available across the system. Commonwealth owns the intellectual property, Commonwealth controls what's in that agency's contextualised, it's free to the agency. Off you go. The work on workforce planning, the same. The census, the same. The work on performance management, that was done in collaboration with a whole bunch of agencies. There were 10 case studies that were done in 10 different agencies. And they looked at the gap between rhetoric and reality. Coming out of that, there was a diagnostic tool that was developed that's now being tested in tax. We kind of figured that the first thing we need to do was break the model, so we took it to tax. It's worked. The point here is that there's an awful lot of fingerprints on this stuff. It's driven by the needs of the system. It's not driven by the wallers in the centre of the system. So we're very hopeful that kind of standing there saying, here's a tool, go play, in circumstances where people are looking for tools to play with, will actually drive that change right across the system. Measuring impact is the hardest thing in our world. There is a whole science of evaluation which fundamentally is around measuring impact. Our hardest thing usually is that we don't have a controlled experiment. So it's not like a natural experiment in science. And typically we discover that governments are a bit wary about running kind of competing trials and trying to defend to one group of citizens that, you're in trial A and somebody else is in trial B and trial B is doing better than trial A and sorry, you've got to wait 2 years until we finish the trial. But nonetheless, that's kind of what we have to do, and my suggestion is we just get good at it. We work with the professionals, we work with the academics, and we develop the tools that we need to do in order to make these evaluation techniques effective in our world. It can be done, we do it from time to time, we just have to do it more consistently. And we have to have ministers prepared to publish the results. And we have to be prepared to defend them in public without being defensive about it. So we might have a step or two to go yet.
I've got to actually just see if there's any people who'd like to ask a question, like a real live human being. Okay, so John Halligan, do you know how to speak in that mic thing? If you hit the red, it goes red.
And I can.
Okay, thank you.
This is addressed to Steve Sedgwick, and I'm posing as the naive academic.
Come on.
Yeah.
That can't be right.
So if you take a department and the elements that you've been speaking about, you could quite intuitively, you would think that the departmental leadership will be thinking of it as a system, even if they didn't articulate it in the way that you have. And most of these elements, I'm leaving aside your new tools, but most of these elements look self-evident. The quality of leadership, capability, performance, etc. Yet CFAR, the CFAR process revealed weaknesses in different sorts of management, and as your SOS surveys have indicated, State of the Service report and Commonwealth Accountability Review, I've probably missed out something.
Financial.
Yeah. Huh?
Financial.
Okay, but they're still indicating significant weaknesses. So my question is, have you raised the bar? Are departmental leaderships lacking? Is there something, I want to get to the system, is there a difficulty managing a system, or is there a problem with managing the interaction among the elements in the system?
It's an interesting question whether we've lifted the bar or not, and the reason for that is that these self-assessment questions that I was referring to earlier, we asked in 2011 as well as in 2013. And in some senses, the depressing thing is that we got the same answers. So 2 years had passed, and on the face of it, nothing had changed. But if you kind of dig a little bit deeper, it looks like we've actually got a bit more realistic at our understanding of the levels that we were at. And sometimes we've also got a bit more realistic about the levels that we needed to be with, because we can see subtle shifts within the data. The capability reviews say that these issues are real. These are external reviews, they say that they're real. The experience of the United Kingdom doing capability reviews, which they began in 2005, say they were real there too. And it's the old problem about the urgent driving out the important. In circumstances where you're really fantastic at implementing the agenda of the government of the day, where you can drive through brick walls in order to get green bats done on pink bats by Tuesday, I was talking about catastrophic failure, where you can drive through, when a government changes, you can change your rhetoric. You know, we've kind of got that business about being responsive to the agenda of the government of the day deep in our DNA. And we do that almightily well. But in the course of doing that, it was a skill we had to learn, we've kind of lost the other one. We've lost that bit to be kind of forward-looking, at least systematically, across the service on average. Some people do it well, right? But we've lost that thing systematically, saying, as well as doing our day job, delivering on the agenda of the government of the day, we've got to remember we are the stewards of an enduring institution. We need to build the capability that we need for tomorrow, as well as to manage the tasks, drive through, manage the tasks, and get the job done for today. And what we're trying to do is, and in fact, what the senior leadership of the service, frankly, is saying is, okay, we have to learn to walk and chew gum. And what I'm trying to say is that given the scale of the adjustment that we're likely to be making over the next 5 or 10 years, it's not only important that we do it, but we'll actually manage that process better if we get a bit more systematic at building some of these capabilities. So the evidence is absolutely clear. Although intellectually we may agree, the fact is that the day jobs have been crowding out, and we've got the skills to do the tasks, right? And we keep kind of doing the tasks every day, but we would actually do the tasks every day a little more easily if we developed some of these capabilities, because we wouldn't be managing crises all the time. And that's what we're trying to do. In the UK, they did their capability reviews, and one of the things that they were able to track over time was a systemic change in the perception of the job of the managers of the Whitehall departments, because they got it. They got the importance of being able to walk and chew gum, and over time they had measurable improvements in capability as a consequence of that, and that's what we're trying to do here too.
Thanks for that. Perhaps a question to Sonja and Stephen Condrey, perhaps. Issue of engagement. So the question is, engagement's difficult if you don't know if you'll have a job next week. How do we engage staff in this uncertainty? And sort of a follow-up is, there's one about how you, beg your pardon. What strategies, Stephen, particularly, you'd have in place to reinvigorate and recruit within the context and constraints. So this whole dilemma of engagement in uncertain times. So Sonja, would you like to have a go at that?
Sure. I think that engagement is even more important in uncertain times, and I think that what we've learned, and admittedly we've only done the survey for the first time last year and we're going to repeat it next year, is that there's some key drivers or factors which associate with people's way of how they answer those questions around engagement. And the biggest one was questions around my organisation. So particularly the question around how's change handled in an organisation as a key driver to people's engagement. So in times of uncertainty and change, it's absolutely important to not drop the ball on engagement. The other one around those question clumpings of my organisation organisation is it involving my organisation involves employees in decisions that affect them, and whether you're going through good times or bad, there's absolutely opportunities to be doing that, so communicating with people and involving them in decisions which affect them, but it's even more essential than not during those difficult times, I think.
I agree with what you said about engagement and also trust. I think those are very important. Employees need to know that their work is valued. They need to have a certain level of trust that they're going to be treated fairly by the organization, particularly by their supervisor. I think that means that leadership is particularly important. Clear expectations for their performance, I think, is important. And also recognition. Recognition does not have to be monetary. It can be, through service awards, things of that nature. But I think we need to build kind of trusting, nurturing relationships in organizations, and then recognize people for what they do.
Thank you. Now, is there another question, live question, just there? Could you speak into your... Please?
I don't have a communicator, but I don't know if I...
Get John Halligan.
Is that... Yes, that sounds as if it's working. It's a question about the relationship between organisational effectiveness and programme effectiveness as they were depicted by Stephen Sedgwick. And it's an invitation to comment on a piece of empirical work. In the UK, in the late Blair and in the Gordon Brown eras, we had departmental capability reviews, which you've already referred to, which you could suppose was some sort of measure of organisational effectiveness. And we also had public service agreements, which were some sort of, or the goals in public service agreements were some sort of measure of programme effectiveness. Had you done what you set out to do, programmatically speaking. Now, the interesting thing about these two sets of measures is that a couple of analyses which have been done appear to show that there is not merely no correlation, but actually a negative correlation between those two measures. In other words, the departments which come out as most organisationally effective are also the ones which regularly fail by the largest margin to achieve their programme targets. So this is an invitation to comment on that perhaps rather paradoxical finding.
There's something wrong with that measurement system. I just can't see how you can have an effective organisation that's failing to hit its highest priorities. And that's the whole point. The whole point about this is to say that we can be really, really good at doing tasks. We can be really, really good at delivering on the program. And we can invest, kind of enormous effort in kind of making sure that we bolted down our favourite program because we invented it and we love it and it's cuddly. Right? But if it isn't actually the highest priority of the organisation, we've done really, really well at something that doesn't matter. And the point about the effectiveness of the organisation is this issue around alignment, to make sure that effort is aligned with the things that are most important, the things that will have the most impact. And, in that sense, it's kind of this outward-looking test, mediated through a political process that says we believe the priorities are X, Y, or Z. So I don't understand what that says. That tells me we're probably measuring the wrong things there somehow, or another. By the way, the point that was being made here about leadership and visibility, we find that in our data absolutely crystal clear. At a time of uncertainty and a time of great change, even a time of fear when people kind of are fearful for their future, the leaders who are visible and who are helping an organisation to make sense of the environment in which they're in, even if they say, but honestly believe, we don't know where this is going, right? But these are the things that we know that we have to do in order to be able to cope with these environments. Those leaders drive engagement, engagement drives good outcomes. So leadership is absolutely fundamental, and we pick it up in a number of different ways, and no matter how you cut it, it's just one of those really, really important things. So, okay, the day job might be hard and, it might feel really nice and comfy under the doona, but that's the worst thing you can do, stay under the doona at times like this. You've got to be out and visible and lead, do your job.
Thank you. Question for Jack, and sort of quite a a specific issue about your survey. It says, Jack, please define interaction as you used it in your survey, but perhaps whilst you then have the mic, is there a dilemma in your mind about the juxtaposition of confidentiality and privacy vis-a-vis the more open methods for consultation?
All right. So when we talk about interaction, we ask specifically our survey respondents to think about the last time they engaged with the government, either for a service delivery interaction, or so for a service delivery or for getting a benefit. So that was on that side. Now, with regards to the juxtaposition between, can you repeat that?
Between confidentiality and privacy vis-a-vis a more open method for consultation. So
All right.
where you talk about there the privacy, confidentiality, and
Yep,
people wanting
yep.
that, yet there's the openness and consultation.
All right. So when we're talking about privacy and confidentiality, I think if I remember correctly, the stats that I mentioned were that about 54% of Australians are very comfortable in sharing, or very comfortable that the government that their data is safe with the government, and that they're happy to provide more personal details in order to help get more effective services from the government, provided that it is easy to do so. Now, in terms of more open engagement with the government, so if we're talking about the consultation, what has happened over the last sort of 2 or 3 years is a significant change of preferred modalities of consultation and engagement with the government. So when we asked the question in 2011, the preferred way of engaging with the government was through questionnaires and letters in the post. Today, that is number 5 after online feedback forms, government portals, online polling, and email. So people are more comfortable interacting with the government via email than actually getting a letter in their post so that they have to fill it out and put it back in. I think when we actually look a little bit deeper into data, I did mention that there are a number of large shifts according to the demographic. And we see that obviously the people who are 50 years and older generally prefer to go more towards the traditional traditional engagement channels, although email is starting to pick up in that demographic, whereas people who are younger, in the younger demographics, have no problems in going to online forms, surveys, and so on and so forth. What I'll say there is also another, probably a learning that we have picked up at Telstra, quite separate from this piece of research, which is our experience as a business. So, as you know, we are probably one of the most active private sector organizations in the online space and in the digital space. And we have a Telstra digital business, which is our pride and joy, which currently, including some of the service transaction, accounts for about 40% of all the transactions we have with our customers. What we do there in the social media, though, is quite interesting. So we have a very significant presence on Twitter and Facebook. And we have developed, we said, all right, we have, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of followers on Facebook. They interact with us on service transactions very regularly. Service transactions pretty much means, I've got a problem, can you fix it? And people, so our customers are very, very comfortable posting that on Facebook or on Twitter and saying, I have a problem, can you fix it? They don't mind the public nature of that. And what we decided to do is say, well, if you are in Facebook and you're doing that, how about we create a Facebook app, which you can do nowadays, and if you have a financial transaction, just do it there because you are in this environment. That didn't work. So the public, our customers, overwhelmingly declined to do financial transactions in a social media space, but they have embraced fully service transactions in that space. So it's really depending on the type of transaction and the type of interaction we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. One live question there, then we'll have one last question from the text. So, thank you. It's got to go red.
I think it's working now. Given that you mentioned that leadership and engagement are key to driving you know, the culture of the public service and also then productivity. There are obviously some senior leaders who do it well and some that don't, but what's it going to take to get to the point where all of our senior leaders and managers in the public service do that well, and we do have that culture, so that when we send out the staff surveys, the engagement and the culture does get a tick? And why are we accepting the way it is currently?
First piece of good news is something like 3/4 of us believe that our manager's fantastic. It's just all their mothers. And that's not particularly unusual, by the way. The thing about the leadership piece is that our understanding of leadership and the requirements of leaders are not static. The world in which we operate is evolving all the time, quite rapidly. And the question for us is our understanding of leadership and is our capacity as leaders to deal with that changing environment evolving at least the pace that the world around us is. And the evidence has been that maybe not, partly because we hadn't really rethought through the nature of leadership, how you develop leaders for about 10 years or so. And so we've redone that piece of work. We no longer send our senior people off to a 3-day course in Barrel, stamp their hand on calling a leader. What we now do is take them on a journey. And that journey can be 6 or 9 months, and it encourages them to experiment, test out doing different things in different places, different contexts, see what works, see what doesn't work, have a kind of a broad understanding of the world in which they're operating. Very, very different way of developing leaders across the public service. We're doing talent management in a completely different way now across the public service to develop succession within organisations. But I think the point, that's kind of the hopeful bit, and it's working, right? The point I'd like to make, though, is that leadership is a practice. It's not just a position. Now, there are some of us who, by virtue of our positions, have particular leadership responsibilities that are different to others. But as Ian Watt keeps saying, in a sense, all of us are leaders. And what he often means by that, what we often mean by that, is that it's we, us and co that actually determine what happens in our workplace. So just as David Morrison is out there saying, it's the standard that you walk past is the standard that you set, which means, kind of the workplace culture, the ethics, the attitudes to work, harassment, all of that kinds of stuff is actually set locally. And we've all got dominant personalities in those local environments. We all have a responsibility in that environment to make sure that our behaviours and our practices are ethical and consistent with what we need to be as public servants. Thank you, Madam Marsh.
A quick comment from Sonja or Stephen.
Thanks for your question. I think that there's something that's going to happen in the medium to longer term about that issue, and I hope you didn't think I was too flippant when I was talking about the market and what we value. I think that over time the market sets a trigger and we become quite clear as across the sector and through employees about what we actually value in our leaders and being a good communicator and being a good manager of people, and I think that will actually happen. I also wish and believe that when we get to difficult things around performance development, that we don't ring up corporate HR, that we ring up the planners and say, well, there's an issue with our planning process because we can't actually align this individual effort, but that's another dream. I think the other thing to do is a bit carrot stick, and so in our jurisdiction what we've absolutely done is put a key result area in everybody's performance agreement who actually manages people. So we're setting a trigger, not only culturally talking about it, but also in agreement saying this is so important that on top of being the best policy waller or project manager, you have to really look at these things and deliver these things if you're a manager of people. And I think the third thing that's happening in our sector, which is quite an interesting process, so we have around 400 or so people we have 8 bands at the moment. 8 would be a secretary and 1 would probably be like an EL 1 or 2. So SES 4 to 6s who are our deputies and who are our agency heads and leaders have all had our capabilities assessed by Hudson, which are an independent group. They're an international organisation. We were benchmarked against against not only other sectors but whole other industry groups, and as a cohort of these, you know, leaders in the sector, and right up there was dealing with complex issues. And hello, you know, we work in complex environments. Too right, we outstripped the cohort internationally there, but strategic HR management wasn't quite up there. And so then there's things that we do as the Commission and take responsibility for that cohort in their executive development, not going to barrel with the stamp, but doing things like, you know, talking about leading through difficult environments, creating a peer group saying it's okay, we know it's a bit difficult. But there's also things that us as leaders have to do when we get our own assessment, and to take that on board and to do something about it.
Well, yeah, it seems like you're actually in Australia doing a good job of trying to develop leaders. And I think one thing that I would say that I would bring back to my colleagues in the United States is that you can't just promote someone and expect them to be an effective supervisor. You need to grow these people. You need to give them opportunities, whether it's through internships, training and development, things of that nature, but we just don't need to take it for granted that someone's going to be able to manage a group of people just because they've achieved technical competence in a particular area, and I think we do that too often.
Thanks, everyone. I think I will call it quits there. No, I won't. I'm going to give you 20 seconds each to say, because it's a good question, what do you think the public service will look like in 20 years? So 20, 30 seconds, and Jack, yours is from a perspective of what the customer would be expecting. So, you go first, Stephen.
I guess
20 seconds.
I'm a hopeful person. I think maybe that we've hit a low point. I think that public leadership is particularly important now. It's going to become more important. So I expect a bright future.
I think I'll echo those points. Interestingly, and I don't have more than 10 seconds, but we actually did a piece of research around that as well. And we asked what the public service is going to look like in 2020. And the feedback was that it's going to be, from the APS, was that it's going to be smaller, more agile, and that specific skills are going to be highly sought after.
I think 20 years smaller, and that our senior management will reflect more broadly the diversity of our country. And I also think that very heavily governments have got this mantra around customer satisfaction and service, and I just think that will be core in a whole lot of ways that we haven't even thought about yet.
Gen X will be in charge.
That's not a bad thing.
Okay.
And Gen Y will be giving them a hard time. But I think most importantly, we will find that the public service naturally collaborates, that some of the departmental boundaries that presently kind of impede collaboration in order to achieve outcomes, which are beginning to break down, I think will have, well, they won't have broken down entirely. But collaboration will be something that we instinctively do rather than something that we have to work at. I think that our accountability, even our personal accountability to the public, will be far stronger than it currently is. And I suspect that we'll be so tech savvy that we'll hate the idea of having to come to work because we can do it from anywhere.
Great. Well, thanks for that. Now, before you all get up, I've got to make a couple of announcements, but could you all grab your little IML things, and we're now going to rate the session.